TRD was once a legitimate high-performance division of Toyota, creating cars that were huge departures in terms of looks and performance from their base models. And on top of that, creating race cars that went on to win championship after championship. But now, TRD is a shell of what it once was, disconnected from racing and barely creating any performance that you and I can enjoy. So what happened? How did Toyota's own idea of BMW M or Mercedes AMG fall into the fractured mishmash of teams that there are today? And is the Gazoo racing division finally the return to Toyota's legendary motorsports heritage? Let's talk about that.
That number 2 Toyota, that was crashing out, hitting a back marker, and that was the end of the race for him.
In 1936, Toyota, an automated loom manufacturer, launched their first car, the Model AA. The AA, along with most of the first Toyota models, were just reverse-engineered versions of Dodges and Fords of the time. And these early Toyotas, they were, well, okay. Then, war.
On December 7th, 1941, Japan, like its infamous Axis partners, struck first and declared war afterwards.
World War II set planet Earth ablaze, and the Imperial Japanese Army needed trucks. So trucks are what Toyota made, and they halted all production in favor of the Toyota KB and KC, which were military vehicles designed solely to carry troops and supplies on the battlefield. By the end of the war, Japan was economically decimated, and Toyota was on the brink of bankruptcy. The company only really made it thanks to a bank bailout and then the US government ordering 5,000 trucks to deploy in the Korean War. With this new cash influx, Toyota decided they needed to expand their current offerings. So in 1947, under a sub-brand called Toyopet, Toyota started selling the Toyopet SA and SB. These new Toyota offerings were selling reasonably well in Japan, but 7 years later, they realized they needed a place to fix all of these new cars they were putting on the roads. So they established Toyota Seibi, which was essentially Toyota's first official repair center. With factories building cars and an established repair center, it was time for Toyota to bring cars to the masses. So in 1955, the Toyota Crown hit the streets of Japan. The Crown was a bit of a departure from Toyotas of old. It had coil springs, double wishbone suspension, and a lightweight yet affordable 4-cylinder engine driving the rear wheels. It was a pretty forward-thinking car for the time, and people loved it in Japan. Then, in 1956, a couple of the mechanics at Toyota Seibi, the repair center, had an idea. Toyota's experience with trucks gave the Crown a rugged chassis, and the double wishbone suspension gave the Crown a bit of agility as well. So, why not take the Crown racing? The Japanese consulate in Australia had just asked Japanese car manufacturers if anyone wanted to race in the Mobile Gas Rally Around Australia. This was an excellent marketing opportunity for Toyota, who wanted to start exporting cars to Australia and the USA. So what better way to create some buzz than to enter a historic race in one of those countries? This wasn't just any race though. This was a 19-day, 17,000 kilometer rally around the entire country of Australia. A race that would put the current Dakar rally to shame. And Toyota decided to enter it in a completely stock Toyota Crown. Very few cars could survive this sort of race, and a failure here would put an internationally recognized blemish on Toyota's reputation. But Shotaro Kamiya, the then president of Toyota Motor Sales, said, "There will be no progress if you fear failure." And so Toyota went in head first. Surely then, the drivers had to be professionals. Nope, it was 2 engineers from Toyota's factory. And after 19 grueling days driving through insane terrain, covering almost 1,000 kilometers a day, the little Crown finished the race. Out of the 86 cars that entered, only 52 made it to the finish line, and Toyota placed 47th out of that pack. It wasn't first place, not even close, but nobody thought that this little ragtag group from Japan could make it past the first stage, let alone finish the entire race. And that little victory was enough. Toyota was hooked on racing. The very next year, in 1958, Japan decided to host their own rally, the Yomiuri Rally Around Japan, and Toyota was ready. Their Toyota Crown won first place overall, making it Toyota's first racing win ever, the first of many to come. By 1961, Toyopet had opened the Tsuneshima factory, and there they were making Crowns, Coronas, and Publicas. And our humble Toyota Seibi division was prepping some race-ready versions of these cars for the then first Japanese Grand Prix. The Grand Prix classes were based off of engine size, like Mario Kart. So Toyota entered a 2-liter Crown, a 1.6-liter Corona, and a 700cc Publica. They won first in every class. By 1965, Toyo Pet was growing at such a rate that they opened another factory in Shibaura, and there they had a special skunkworks race division. This special team was made up of the same Toyo Pet Seibi mechanics that were dominating the racetracks from before. But with a new factory comes the need for a new name. And so Toyota Pet Seibi became Toyota Service Center Co. Their prime directive? Build the ultimate race car for the road. And what they came out with was the legendary Toyota 2000 GT. Yes, the car that is considered one of Japan's most beautiful cars. The design inspiration for every Toyota sports car moving forward was made by a backroom group of nerdy mechanics who just love to race cars. But it wasn't just beautiful. The 2000 GT was fast. It set 3 different automobile world records and 13 international records. And at its freshman race, the Suzuka 1000, it came in first place. The car made such an impact that even Sean Connery drove one as James Bond in You Only Live Twice. Toyota was in a worldwide spotlight, so it was all the more important for them to impress on the racetrack as well. And the 2000 GT went on to win the 1968 Fuji 24-hour race. Toyota was on a roll, so also in 1968, they created something special, the Toyota 7 race car. This was a full-on dedicated racing machine with a 3-liter twin-cam V8 co-developed with Yamaha. And despite a few hiccups during the regular season, it ended up winning its class at the Japanese Grand Prix. By 1970, Hiromu Naruse, a fiercely passionate mechanic and test driver, helped create the Toyota Motorsports division based out of Switzerland that took the Toyota 7 racing at Spa and eventually even the Nürburgring. And in that same year, Naruse's team created the Turbo Toyota 7. It was a 5-liter twin-cam V8, but also with 2 Garrett turbos strapped to it. Needless to say, this was going to be the fastest race car that Toyota had ever created. But it wasn't meant to be. On the very same day that Toyota approved plans to enter the Can-Am Challenge Cup in North America, Minoru Kawai, one of Toyota's lead drivers, lost control of his Toyota 7 while testing at Suzuka Circuit. The car hit a groove in the grass infield and went airborne, ejecting Kawai from the car. He was killed on impact. This was the biggest blow that Toyota's racing team had seen in its brief history, and it shook them. Toyota withdrew from all racing series that the 7 was entered in, and by September of 1970, before the Turbo 7 ever saw a real race, the entire Toyota 7 project had shut down. Things were quiet for the next few years, but while Toyota had stopped racing prototype cars on world circuits, turns out they had never stopped racing in the sport that started it all: rally. In 1972, Toyota partnered with Swedish rally driver Ove Andersson and created Toyota Team Europe, a team that was designed solely to conquer the rally stages through Europe. They entered the Celica 1600 GT into the RAC Rally of Great Britain, and despite the weight of tragedy looming over their heads, they persevered and they won. This was huge for Toyota, a first step in moving forward from where the untimely end of the 7 project had stopped them. It was so big, in fact, that Toyota wanted the people of the world to be able to share that rally win with them. And so they started selling genuine aftermarket parts for the Celica. So you could soup up your Celica at home and feel like a rally driver on your way to work. This was one of the first instances of Toyota using their race engineering to bring us, the people, parts that we could install ourselves. And this was the beginning of something big. The mid-70s saw more rally wins for Toyota. And in 1975, Toyota decided that Toyota Service Center Co. Special Development Department wasn't the best name for their growing motorsports aftermarket parts industry. So they changed it to Tosco Depot. But as cute as Tosco Depot sounds, it doesn't really exude the razor-sharp motorsports focus that Toyota had at the time. So in 1976, they decided to change the name again to Toyota Racing Development, TRD. Keep in mind that Toyota Team Europe was still technically a separate entity. They handled rally while TRD took care of racing on the circuit. And take care of it they did, with the 80s being an absolute blur of dominance for TRD. TRD partnered with Dan Gurney to race the Celica in IMSA, where they won the Drivers' and Manufacturers' Championships in '87. They joined Formula 3 and took first, second, and third in the 1983 Macau Grand Prix. And they even raced in stadium truck racing, where they won 11 Manufacturers' Championships and 9 Drivers' Championships with Ivan Stewart and Rod Millen. But let's not forget Toyota Team Europe. They won the World Rally Championship Safari in 1984, 85, 87, and again in 1990 with the Celica GT4, a car which Toyota homologated in road-going form with the Celica ST165 and ST185. Back in Japan, it was no different, with the TRD AE86 winning the 1985 Japan Touring Car Championship and the Mark III Supra Turbo winning the Japan Touring Car Championship in 87. And 17 years after that tragic accident in the Toyota 7, TRD took a triumphant new racing prototype, the 87C, to the checkered flag at the Suzuka 1000 km, placing first. And when the 1990s rolled around, Toyota showed no sign of slowing down. Ivan Stewart and Rod Millen, well, they won nearly every single event that they entered. The Baja 500, the Baja 1000, the Grand National Sports Truck Championship, the Nevada 400, even the Pikes Peak International Hill Climb, where Rod Millen won the Unlimited class in 94, 96, 97, 98, and 99. Toyota wasn't shy about bringing these motorsports technologies to us either, with the SWMR2 and the A80 Supra hitting dealer showrooms in the early 90s. In 1993, Toyota bought all of the assets of Toyota Team Europe and consolidated it with Toyota Motorsports GmbH. GmbH just means LLC in German, by the way. Based out of Germany, they were still separate from TRD and continued to manage the rally team, but now also the endurance racing team. The rally team, by the way, won the World Rally Championship in 93 and 94 with the Celica GT4, which hit the public streets as the ST205 Celica All-Track, one of my favorite cars of all time, which we also never got in the United States. In 1994, TRD took the then new Supra and showed off a souped-up concept called the TRD 3000 GT. Based off the winning GT500 Supra race car, this Supra had a full wide-body kit, huge dish wheels, and a very 90s adjustable rear wing. They gave the MR2 the same treatment and called it the TRD 2000 GT. Both kits were produced as dealer add-ons, but TRD also decided to build 35 examples of the TRD 3000 GT Supra at their own factory, and they sold them with their own unique VIN plates. This Supra technically wasn't a Toyota. It was a TRD. And if you thought that wasn't crazy enough, in 1995, TRD created a supercharger kit for the XV20 Camry. Yeah, TRD was so deep in the performance game, they were supercharging Camrys. And in 1997, TRD USA released the TRD off-road package for the Tacoma and started a long line of factory-modified Toyota trucks. At this point in the late 90s, TRD had something for everyone. Sedans, trucks, dedicated sports cars, they could all be tuned with the help of Toyota Racing Development. And in 2000, Toyota even joined NASCAR. Yeah, TRD was in the most red, white, and blue racing there is. But I'll be honest, most people didn't even realize Toyota was in NASCAR, because in 2002, Toyota joined Formula One. And boy, did it all go horribly wrong. Remember Toyota Motorsports GmbH, the guys that did the rally team? Well, they were banned for a year in 1995 from rally for using illegal parts, and they spent a boatload of money in 1997 to make the prototype Toyota GT1, one of my favorite cars in Gran Turismo. But they failed to take a Le Mans win in 98 or 99. So in 99, they decided to quit everything and take 3 years to regroup and enter Formula One in 2002. Toyota had the second biggest budget in Formula One that year, with only Ferrari spending more. The Toyota F102 car looked promising, but on the circuit, they were plagued with reliability issues and a poorly managed team. They won just 2 points in their first year. 2. 2003, they did better. By the end of the year, they had 16 points, which landed them 8th place in the Constructors' title. In 2004, well, that was even worse than 2003. And that same year, Ferrari accused them of industrial espionage. They insisted that Toyota had stolen their files and straight up copied their car. And Toyota refused to send their data to Italy because they said Ferrari was just gonna steal it. Eventually, the entire investigation came to a halt because the evidence was inconclusive. But either way you look at it, it wasn't good for Toyota. Next year, 2005, was Toyota's best season. They had a few second and third place finishes, but overall it wasn't enough to make a showing on the competitive F1 field. Despite that, Toyota continued to race in every F1 season until 2009, where towards the end of the season, they pulled out. Citing huge financial losses, Toyota said F1 was just too cost prohibitive, so they killed it. Over the course of 8 years, Toyota spent over $2 billion on Formula One and won nothing. By this point, the expensive F1 saga had left such a bad taste in Toyota's mouth that they didn't even produce any road-going sports cars anymore, with the 2006 model year Celica GTS being the last sporty car of that era. It was one of Toyota's biggest racing fails in its nearly 50-year history, riddled with poor management and controversy. Even TRD, which was technically a separate entity, was still hit hard, and by the time that F1 ended, TRD was producing very little other than off-road packages for some of its trucks. Interestingly though, in 2007, while Toyota's F1 team was treading water, a couple of Toyota engineers took 2 Altezas to the Nürburgring 24-hour. One of 2 notable members was Hiromu Naruse, the same Toyota test driver that started the Skunkworks race team that created the Toyota 7 in 1970. The other notable member, Akio Toyoda, the then vice president of Toyota Motor Corporation. Both were racing under fake names. Naruse was Cap, and Akio was Moriso. The team name, Gazoo Racing. Strange. It turns out this wasn't just Naruse's idea. Akio Toyoda himself saw to it that this backroom racing division came to life. With a minimal budget and without the prying eyes of the world on them, Gazoo Racing was created to revive the Toyota sports car spirit. Naruse's philosophy was not to discuss car making with words and data, but to actually create things and touch them. Discuss it with the eyes. And Gazoo Racing wasn't an ordinary race team. It was an incubator. Engineers were brought in from various departments at Toyota and put into this rigorous GR program where they developed race cars and technologies for the 24 hours of Nürburgring. They served 2-year stints and then were sent back to their respective departments, armed with new skills and knowledge forged in the heat of racing. And in 2009, Akio Toyoda became the president of Toyota Motor Corporation, and he decided that Gazoo Racing was worth expanding. So GR began testing the LFA prototype, along with the FT86 concept mules, and it wasn't just on track. Gazoo Racing began releasing dedicated tuned versions of various cars in Japan, starting with the IQ GRMN, which had an upgraded motor and a 6-speed manual transmission. So then, despite the failures of the F1 team, Toyota was setting up the pieces to make a triumphant return in motorsports. And when it came to road cars, the LFA, my all-time favorite car, was slated for release in 2010, and the FT86 in 2012. And the LFA didn't just stop there. It was slated to have an even quicker version, the Nürburgring edition. This was the passion project of Hiromu Naruse himself. It was slated to come at the end of standard LFA production, and it was going to be the pinnacle of what the LFA could be in Naruse's eyes. He himself saw to testing it at the Green Hell, and turned out lap after lap on the Nordschleife. In June 2010, Naruse was at the Nürburgring testing the LFA. In the late afternoon, he set out in his yellow Nürburgring edition on a drive of the public roads near the track. On that drive, Naruse's LFA collided with a BMW 3 Series at speed. And despite wearing a helmet at that time, Naruse was killed in the crash. One of the godfathers of Toyota's sports cars, the test driver of the Sports 800, the 2000 GT, every generation of Celica, the AE86 Corolla, the first and third generation MR2s, the Supra, the Altezza, and of course the Lexus LFA, was no more. Akio Toyoda considered shutting down Gazoo Racing because the loss of Naruse was too much to bear. But eventually he decided that Naruse would want the team to continue. And 1 year later, from that fateful day, Gazoo Racing drove the LFA Nürburgring edition to the 5th fastest production car record at the Green Hell with a 7:14.46. It beat the Porsche 911 GT2 RS by nearly 10 seconds. And after that, the LFA raced again in the Nürburgring 24 hours, finishing 3rd in class in 2011 and taking a class win in 2012. And in 2013, Gazoo Racing entered not 1 but 2 LFAs, along with the new Toyota 86 in the Nürburgring 24 hours. All 3 cars won 1st in class. And with those wins, Gazoo Racing could finally feel that Hiromu Naruse's vision had finally been realized. An LFA race car now lives in the Toyota Kaikan Museum in Toyota City, still dirty, beaten, battered from its victory at the Nordschleife. And just a few steps away, in a glass display case, is a black racing suit with H. Naruse stitched onto the belt, along with his helmet and gloves and 2 Nürburgring trophies. They say it watches over that car and all of Gazoo racing. Now, it's important to keep in mind that all this while, TRD and Toyota Motorsports GmbH still existed. TRD was doing alright in NASCAR, and they even joined drag racing. On top of that, their trucks were doing pretty well in the off-road championship. Production car-wise, they really weren't doing much other than intakes and exhaust and a couple of off-road packages for the trucks. The German Toyota Motorsports GmbH decided to get back into racing after the F1 fiasco, this time in Le Mans prototypes. They leveraged Toyota's hybrid technology to make the TS030 hybrid endurance racer. And while it didn't do particularly well, the later versions really came into their stride, with the TS040 winning a manufacturer's championship and the TS050 going on to take multiple wins at Le Mans. All the while, Gazoo Racing was becoming a bigger and bigger entity at Toyota. And so they decided they needed to simplify things. So Toyota Motorsports GmbH was absorbed into the Gazoo Racing umbrella, along with all international forms of racing, including rally. This new, more expansive Gazoo Racing went on to become a legitimate performance division for Toyota, creating dedicated sports cars like the GR Supra in 2019 and the GR Yaris in 2020. They even created special edition GRMN, or Gazoo Racing Meisters of the Nürburgring editions of various Toyota cars, including a supercharged Toyota IQ, a turbo Vitz, a 6-speed manual Mark X, which is basically a manual V6 Camry. These GRMN cars were sold in small, limited numbers in Japan. But there are rumors that a GRMN Supra, along with a GR Corolla, is gonna hit US shores sometime in the next few years. So then, if Gazoo Racing is the worldwide racing development shop for Toyota, where does that leave TRD, the supposed Toyota racing development team? At this point, I'm not sure. TRD still exists in both Japan and the USA. And while the Japanese TRD does occasionally make big brake kits and suspension for some cars, most of what they sell are expensive carbon fiber body kits. TRD USA, well, really just makes lifted suspension kits for their trucks. Although I should mention, TRD USA is trying to do more with the addition of the TRD Camry and TRD Avalon. But even though they are reasonably fun with tuned suspension and brakes, it really is a far cry from the TRD supercharged Camrys from back in the day. So with TRD not really involved in a lot of racing and not making much for the Toyota aftermarket, why does TRD continue to exist? To me, it seems like the Toyota racing development is just a confused remnant of a time long gone by. So maybe it's time to lay to rest the TRD name, the same name that's been emblazoned on winning race cars since the 70s. And in its place, give us the new name that stands on LMP and rally podiums today. The way I see it, TRD is dead. Long live Gazoo Racing. Thank you guys so much for watching. Hit like if you liked the video and subscribe if you want to see more videos like this. If you guys want to cop one of these crashed A90 shirts, there's a link in the description below. I'll see you guys later.